Realm presents The Vela Salvation, Episode 8.
Trickling water echoed in the emptiness inside the equilibrium. It was met with soldiers' footfalls and hot whispers tinged with frustration. The abandoned cruiser had crossed through the wormhole and hastily died. Hana's team managed to get life support online, but the 6-person squad had spent the better part of 8 hours searching for the exotic matter by flashlight. Hana Afet Medina glared at Private Adeo and the other 5 soldiers. She struggled to keep herself from shouting, and as a result, the next few words came out as calm, tight grunts. The foul smell alerted them to the closed-in state of the cruiser. Repeat. Private Adeo swallowed so loudly, Hana heard it. The soldier kept her eyes straight ahead, her chin up, but despite the staunch body position, her voice wavered. We cannot find the exotic matter, sir. Private Adeo closed her mouth, but a jaw muscle spasmed as if alerting the other soldiers to her anxiety. Did you check the areas in the ship's bay? Hana clenched her hands into fists. Affirmative, Adeo answered. The lab. The location of her secret lab is an abandoned living quarter, sir. There's nothing in there but old clothes, a few discarded bottles, vases, and whatnot. We've been through this old cruiser 3 times. No exotic matter, sir. Private Adeo's tone became more confident as she spoke. Something was wrong. Hana could feel it in her gut, but she swallowed her disbelief. Instead, she took in her soldiers. Dust-covered, worn, sweaty, and no doubt tired, they'd scoured this location from top to bottom, and they'd come up with nothing of any importance. No exotic matter. She nodded at them. As you were, Hana said, crossing her arms and turning away from the soldiers. The team relaxed from attention, glad the commander's wrath hadn't befallen them. There wouldn't be any such peace for Hana. Without the exotic matter, they wouldn't be able to open the wormhole. Without the wormhole, the reunion with Mia wouldn't happen, and her goal drifted further from her grasp. The pain in her palms wrenched her back to the situation at hand. As she unrolled her fingers, hissing at the ache, she spied the reddish half-moons along her palms from where her fingernails dug into them. Commander? Private Adeo called to her. Yes? Hana turned back to the team, her calm face masking the fear and disappointment rumbling beneath the surface. She plugged into her training, suppressing her emotions into a flat, blunt sword that ripped her up on the inside. Should we start back to the Vela? Adeo dusted off her uniform. Yes, we should head back. Hana replied, the words like stones on her tongue. Team, let's return to the Vela. Yes, sir, they replied in unison. They commenced working at once, collecting their gear. Meanwhile, Hana pulled Adeo to her into a private conversation a few feet from the others. She grabbed her arm and spun the young soldier around to face her. You looked everywhere. You know how important this is for us. It wasn't quite a statement. Private Adeo nodded. Yes, sir. Everyone on this team was handpicked because of our attachments to those left behind. It's personal. We all understand the importance of finding the exotic matter, sir. I know. Hana clapped Adeo on the shoulder. And it isn't here, Adeo finished. Perhaps it never was, Hana said to herself. Private Adeo met Hana's stare, the implications clear. Professor Uzochi lied. Why? Why would the professor lie to her? A sinister jump to a conclusion, and Hana dismissed it. Perhaps the older woman had simply been mistaken. True, the relationship between herself and Uzochi was strained, but reopening the wormhole benefited them both. Or so Hana had thought. Why send her on this wild goose chase? To embarrass her? Had she allowed her desperation to blind her to the basic wisdom that once someone shows you who they are, believe them? Hana shoved it all aside. There was only one way to get answers. Ask questions. Hana had a gut feeling there was more to this little venture than Uzochi had told her. As that thought ended, her communications device alerted.
Commander Avet Medina, come in, please.
This is Commander Avet Medina. The hairs on the back of her neck stood in alarm. The soldier's emotions came across clear as a bell. Frustration, worry. Go ahead.
Sir, all of the 3D printers are down, both on the surface and here in orbit. We're unable to do anything. The programmers are trying to get them rebooted, but it seems we're locked out.
Locked out by whom? Hana asked.
We don't know, and I apologize, sir, for contacting you while you were away, but we're unable to produce the tools needed to finish the repairs on the rear sections and some in engineering. We're getting inundated with complaints from the surface as well.
Calm yourself, soldier. We are on the way back. Commander Avet Medina out. She ended the communication. The sting of the failed expedition lingered like a bad aftertaste in her mouth. But this dilemma appeared to be one she could solve, concrete and within her powers to conclude. Refreshed with the new problem, Hana set her emotions aside as her training had taught her. She marched over to the remaining members of her team. Get your gear. Let's go now. When Hana and her team arrived on the Vela, they walked into chaos. Several soldiers rushed up to her, their faces fraught with frustration, all talking at once. She raised her hands to silence them. I'm aware of the situation. We're working on it, Hana explained. She turned to the 6 soldiers who had accompanied her on the expedition. Go rest, eat, and meet me in the debriefing room tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. Yes, sir, they said in chorus, and scattered like children told a sweet treat awaited them. Hana turned her attention to Uzochi. She headed to the captain's deck. Once the doors closed off the noisy chaos outside, she called up the computer. She fished out her dog tags and wrapped her hand around them, holding the smooth metal in her hand. Her thumb rubbed the chip taped there, and instantly Mia's smiling face and sparkling eyes appeared in Hana's mind. She closed her eyes and allowed herself the indulgence. So vivid the memory, she could almost smell Mia's scent, a soft fragrance unique to her. It stirred Hana's emotions, uncorking the tight lid her military training kept on her feelings. Computer, where is Professor Uzochi? Hana asked. In truth, she should give it some time before approaching the professor, but with 3D printing down across the planet and on board, plus the lack of exotic matter, she couldn't let it sit. She needed answers now. Professor Uzochi is in her lab, the computer answered. Hana put her gear down, brushed off her uniform with her hands, checked her face in the mirror, and left the deck. No way would she sit and lick her wounds. She made a direct line to Uzochi's lab connected to the Vela, the farthest she could get from Hana. Now, she walked along the illuminated path through the ship to Uzochi as things fell apart around her. She'd been in worse situations, even personal ones such as this. But she'd found that as things became more complicated, more painful, or harder, she excelled. Her grit and determination would not be bowed. Not by Uzochi, not by Asala, not by anyone. If she had to, she'd chase down every lead. She and Uzochi were hurtling toward a collision of wills, and Hana wouldn't flinch from the battle. Before she realized it, she arrived at Uzochi's ship. The door opened as she approached. Hana stood outside the double glass doors of Uzochi's lab. The rest of the path forked into other parts of the ship. She brushed her hands along her pants, took a deep breath, and pressed the button announcing her arrival. Through the glass, she spied Uzochi hunched over a computer. At the button's toll, her head shot up, and she turned to the doors. She waved Hana in. Hana approached the professor, touching her weapon as she took in her surroundings. She didn't expect a violent encounter, but with Uzochi, she didn't know for sure. "Where is everyone?" Hana asked, turning her attention back to Uzochi. "At lunch. When all the 3D printers are down? Do you know anything about that?" Hana didn't let the accusation leave her tone. Uzochi waved her off. "I had them all shut down. There was a system-wide virus. The cybernetics team is running an antidote as we speak." Hana decided to check that later. "You're back from your expedition earlier than I anticipated." Uzochi gave her a greasy smile. "That's because you sent me on a wild goose chase. I wasted resources, Uzochi, and we don't exactly have those to waste on your little pranks." Hana released a slow breath between clenched teeth. "So you didn't find it? Did you at least find the lab?" Uzochi's shoulders sagged. She returned to her chair and spun it around to face Hana. "We discovered your old, smelly living quarters. Nothing more." Hana replied coolly. "I do not take kindly to being lied to." Uzochi laughed. She threw back her shaggy head and cackled like a child who just got the joke. She smacked her hand on the desk. Hana balled up her fist and stepped toward the other woman, determined to shut her open, laughing mouth. She caught herself and fell back into her attentive soldier stance. Uzochi wiped her eyes and lowered her glasses back into position. As she did, she looked at Hana and said, "I don't like you, Commander, that's true. Still, I will give you this gift. Something that will make your sour face smile." Hana narrowed her eyes at Uzochi. She hesitated to ask, so she decided to remain silent. Truth be told, she didn't trust herself to speak at this moment, so she listened. Alone with Uzochi in her lab, on her own ship, Hana had to tread with caution. "Asala has discovered this planet's major vegetation, a fungus." Hana balked. "I don't want to hear about some damn fungus, Uzochi. What are you going to do about the exotic matter to open the wormhole? Stop testing my patience." Uzochi waved her down. "Calm yourself, Commander. Hear me out, please. Why don't you sit down?" "I'll stand." Hana didn't want to accept any of Uzochi's attempts at politeness. Each nerve in her being stood sharp in alarm. She wouldn't be lured into a false sense of security. "Suit yourself." Uzochi turned her back to Hana and pointed at the screen beside the computer. "As I was saying, this planet's fungus can be harnessed and made into exotic matter. That's my hypothesis. From what I've studied of the sample sent up, I believe it can become exotic matter." Stunned, Hana gaped at the screen. She managed to croak out, "What?" Uzochi smirked. "Got your attention now, eh? We just need your authorization to collect the fungus." "Yes, of course. How much fungus do you need?" Hana asked, relieved that the goal of reopening the wormhole wasn't dead. Hope blossomed. Soon she'd get to see Mia again. "That's the thing, Commander. We will need to bomb the fungus's centralized location. This way, we can spark the fungus to generate enough exotic matter to reopen the wormhole." Uzochi finished, her thin eyebrows lowered in determination. Hana paused and replayed Uzochi's words in her mind. Then aloud she said, "For clarity, did you say we have to bomb the fungus's center?" "Yes." "Do we have a location for that?" "Just beneath the planet's surface. We have scientists on the ground attempting to confirm the coordinates. That's why this lab is empty. They're all on the surface. Uzochi, if we bomb the fungus's center, we will destroy the planet and everything on it. It won't matter because we will reopen the wormhole and escape, this time with everyone, Uzochi said. But Hana had gleaned clues from what Uzochi didn't state and had already reached that gut-wrenching conclusion. Kill everything on the planet to reopen the wormhole. The professor didn't mince words. This would be an intentional act of killing everything. The horror of the moment sunk in. Still, it offered one hell of an incentive. Uzochi, where will those we save go if we destroy this planet? Hana asked. Uzochi swept right on the screen, and a star map appeared. There are other planets in the solar system we can inhabit. What do you say, Commander? This should put a big grin on that stern face. Hana looked from the star map to Uzochi, and then back to the map. I will need some time to put things together. A slow grin emerged on Uzochi's face. You do that. Asala was on the ground, but the mission remained the same. Her pack weighed heavily on her, despite being lightweight. Sweat slid down her face, and she wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. It came away with a smear of the reddish fungus that accumulated on everything that didn't move. Quick and easy. Get in, take out the problem, get out. She rounded on the radar. This is it? Glazed eyes stared out at the surroundings. His nose was caked in dried blood that left trail marks along his chin. He didn't reply, but it didn't matter. She could hear the soft murmuring of conversations off in the distance. With a glance at Neve, she climbed out of the jeep. What are you doing? Neve asked. I'm going to get my cruiser back. Stealing resources when there's enough for everyone is ridiculous. She patted her pack. You're gonna go off on your own? Neve shook her head. You don't even know where we are or how far off their camp is. By the stars, Asala, Sim could be lying outright. There might be tracks and defenses around this camp. You saw how determined they were earlier. Asala nodded. I did, but they don't know how determined I am. The sooner I'm done with this, the sooner I can get on to finding a spot for me and Dio to settle and live. Then she can come down from orbit. Neve shook her head. Jude, help me out here. Tell her it's crazy. Jude pondered for a moment, stroking his chin. With a one-shoulder shrug, he said, I think she has a better chance than any of us. Neve sighed and, with a strong look of resolve, said to Asala, I'll be here if you need me. Keep this communicator on you. Asala accepted the device as she met the other woman's eyes. She spied the fear that wavered there in unshed tears. They'd already been through obstacles that would have hindered other teams, outright violence, attacks, and death. So far, Salvation hadn't lived up to its name, but the day remained young. She looked at the twin burning suns in the sky and sighed. Now or never. Don't worry. I'll be in and out in a matter of hours. Keep Sim secure. Do not let him go for any reason. I don't want him raising the alarm or alerting the others. If I'm not back by nightfall, make camp, okay? And Asala started for the voices in the distance and the spiral of smoke swirling above the tree line. With determination, she put her focus solely on the mission at hand. Everything that had happened deepened her commitment to resolve this mission, this one little roadblock, and get back to what she wanted to do. She adjusted her pack and wiped the reddish dust off her arms and hands. The thick humidity and parched air dried her throat, but also made her sweat. Vegetation and its undergrowth grew wild off the path others had cut through. The raiders and their vehicles had forged a path to establish their own camp. While the idea of salvation as a new world resided in everyone finding ways to survive and thrive in their new camps and establishments, human nature still reared its ugly head. The raiders stole from others. This lush planet offered a variety of resources that could sustain all. That was why they selected it. They wouldn't spoil it. She wouldn't let them. Not this time. Not ever again. Asala pushed through the bush, using her machete to cut through the untamed tangles in a sweeping, careful approach. Stealth was key. If she could move through the bushes without too much noise, she did. She shifted her thoughts to Dio. The opportunity remained to connect with her sister and embark on the life they'd been denied. Beneath Dio's stern exterior resided the loving girl who wrote poetry and sought beauty in individuals and in life. Brilliant flora and fauna erupted around Asala. With each step, more diverse beauty sprouted. The air was thick with fragrances she'd never encountered before. It created a heavy mixture so intoxicating she stopped abruptly to make sure she was heading toward the voices and smoke of the raiders' camp. She brushed the dust from her arms, and for the briefest of moments, she thought of Oba. Asala cast her gaze upward and realized the smoke had grown closer than before, and so had the murmurs of conversation. Occasionally, the spontaneous shriek of laughter punctuated the hushed atmosphere around her. She turned off her internal monologue and paid attention to her surroundings. Something slithered across her boot and she stepped back, forcing herself not to yelp and run. She didn't want to startle anyone, let alone the animal moving across the ground toward its own destination. Releasing a breath of relief, Asala inched forward, careful to avoid stepping on downed branches and crunchy leaves. Thankfully, the ground bore the soft cushion of vegetation, damp from previous days' rain. The thick overhead canopy kept the floor wet, and Asala's boots fell in quiet steps. She managed to reach the camp, with the voices growing louder and clearer. One single voice rose high and loud above the others. With a scowl, Asala hunched down behind the tall brush. The male voice rang out with the tone of authority, one she'd heard from many people before, from President Ekram to General Sinrik. Those in power all sounded the same, voices thick with hubris and dripping with self-importance. With careful fingers, she parted the bright orange reeds in front of her. Ahead, she spied a platform, square and chunky, apparently 3D printed. Seated in a U formation, approximately a dozen people listened to a standing speaker, some verbally offering confirmation and affirmations. From what she could make out, a camp had been established beyond the platform. She couldn't quite make out the structures farther off in the distance. The homes were identical in format, the product of a 3D printer. It didn't offer a ton of variety when it came to living quarters. She turned her attention back to the raiders seated in front of the robe-draped speaker. To Asala's surprise, the listeners were covered in the reddish dust. She almost didn't recognize them as breathing living human beings, not red statues planted into the ground. So still, their attention fixed on the lecturer and his words. What in the name of the stars was this? Embrace the visions. They offer guidance for your life, your dreams, and your aspirations. We must accept the scarlet love the planet has given to us. Embrace its wisdom and revelations. This planet is salvation, not just for your body, but also your spirit, your mind. These are the raiders? The thieves that stole my cruiser and hit other camps throughout the area? Asala took in the clothing, the same as the man tied to the flatbed. These people were definitely the right group. Let us lift our heads to the twin stars. Close your eyes and witness the visual splendor of the planet's gift to us, the leader instructed, lifting red-palmed hands to the audience. Great timing. The idea sparked, and Asala moved smoothly. She slid the pack down her back and brought it around to the front. As she crouched down, her hands and muscle memory took over. For the second time in as many days, Asala placed her thumb on a square sensor located on the handle for her sniper rifle. In seconds, the rifle was assembled. The plan outlined in her mind was simple. Cut off the head. Clearly, the leader held some reverence within the group, if what she witnessed was any indication. Take away the one driving the decisions, and the followers would scatter. A humming rose up against the sticky, hot day. Asala realized it came from the raiders as they meditated. It sounded like a chorus of bees, even better. She applied the silencer and lay on her belly. She wouldn't forget to breathe like last time. Using the silencer, she parted the vegetation again. She placed the sniper rifle on her pack and its case, a makeshift pile to provide some leverage. She clicked the legs of the bipod mount down and put her eye to the scope. As she waited, her gaze traced her target as he walked back and forth along the platform. The leader came into clear view, and she waited for him to drift into her shot. He raised his arms, shouting words of thanks and love. Closer. One more inch. She took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. She heard the scream of a person hit. Got him. But as she followed the shot, she realized the audience circled around another person seated in the front row. The leader had sidestepped the shot, but his follower slumped over in front of him. How? The man was directly in my crosshairs. The bullet didn't even graze him. He's shot, someone screamed, cradling the injured individual in their arms. Asala crouched down to disassemble the rifle, and in moments, she had placed it back in its box and her pack on her person. She started crawling backward away from the site. A solitary cry thundered above the chaotic scene, making her blood run cold. Seize her! The leader pointed directly at her position. She thinks she's unseen. I wasn't in your crosshairs. How did he see me? Did he know I was here the whole time? Asala scrambled to her feet and ran. Behind her, the shouts of her pursuers grew louder, closer. Her labored breathing filled her ears, drowning out the angry noise. As she tried to remember the way she'd come, Asala growled in annoyance. How did he sidestep that shot? It was dead-on perfect. Instead, a group of furious raiders chased her through an unfamiliar jungle. Great, Asala, just great. She fought the rising fear in her throat. With a quick glance over her shoulder, Asala spied 2 raiders who had leapt ahead of the others. She pushed herself to get away from them, but as she returned her attention to the landscape ahead, a rogue branch came out of nowhere and snared her shirt, tearing it in the process. The higher branches opened a gash on her forehead. Asala jolted to a stop. Her fingers felt clumsy as she fumbled to free herself. It was then she heard Daio's commanding voice from over her shoulder. Let me help you. Asala froze as Daio reached around her and carefully removed the snared fabric from the branch. She smiled serenely at Asala. See, don't panic. You make mistakes when you panic, so stay calm. How are you here? I thought you were in orbit. Asala grabbed Daio and pulled her behind the bush. Her sister's face didn't look quite right. The usual emotionless mask Daio wore had melted into a smiling, gentle disposition, that of a poet, a creative, a wide-open heart. Everything Daio had been before, well, before everything. Baffled, Asala rubbed her eyes. Her hand was smeared with red, not blood, but the planet's ever-present fungus dust mixed with her sweat. She grabbed Daio's shirt and dragged her down to a crouched position behind the tree. They're coming. What are you doing here? Asala asked again. Transfixed, she peered around the tree, but her pursuers had vanished. She couldn't even hear them shouting anymore. Dio lowered her gaze, and she reached out and hugged Asala. The warmth of her arms spread through Asala, and she closed her eyes, sinking into the moment that she'd longed for since reuniting with her sister. She'd ached for this moment, and had risked all for it. Being apart from Dio left a void inside her. Dio pulled back a bit, but still held her, a look of concern softening her features. Asala, you're crying. I only have tears because my heart is healing, Asala said with a sniffle. At this, Dio threw back her head and gave a hearty laugh. This isn't funny. This isn't right. Dio's hold on her arms tightened. Ow, you're hurting me, Asala hissed. Let go. A branch snapped, but it sounded loud in the quiet. She looked around the tree, but when she turned back, Dio had disappeared. In her place, a bulky raider grinned, his gray eyes narrowed in glee. He hoisted her to her feet. Gotcha, he growled. Confused, she scanned the area. What did you do to my sister? The raider laughed. There's no one else here but you and us. Where is she? Where's Dio? Asala shouted. The raider ignored her and continued to restrain her wrists. They stripped her of her gear as several others joined them. She searched the surroundings for her sister. But Dio was gone. A torrent of ideas and scenarios flooded through Asala as she turned her attention to her captors. The raider shoved her roughly forward. Once she processed the shock, she returned to herself. Beneath the peaceful veneer, a hint of raw violence simmered. Several of the raiders bore facial injuries. They marched her back the way she'd come, right into the camp. She wasn't here. They didn't take her. I dreamed her, hallucinated her. But it felt so damn real. She thought back to Oba and how convinced he'd been in the end. The raiders filed around her just before the leader. The tall man had a shaved head that gleamed in the sunlight. Dark gray eyes full of quiet judgment peered at her. His skin glowed with the reddish dust, glistening from what looked like every surface of his body. A pistol hung from his waist, and a sheathed dagger rested on his other side. A thriving camp surrounded her, with ill-gotten gains they'd taken from others, including 2 3D printers and her cruiser. How the fortunes turn. You injured Xavier, and may have taken his life, the leader said. You took my cruiser, Asala replied, her temper ignited. You thieves steal my gear, wreak havoc on others, and you have the gall to talk to me about what I've taken? It's true. We take things from others, but we also receive. The planet, it has given us so much of what we lost in the evac. The leader swept his arm outward to the people standing in front of his platform. The ground, stained scarlet by Xavier's blood, remained untouched by others, as if they were afraid to step there. The what? Asala asked. These people weren't playing in the same pool. The leader gave her a smile, brimming with contempt. I am Dr. Marcus Montgomery, and this is our camp. I'm alive because the fungus wants me to be. The fungus? This dust warned you? It doesn't make any sense. Asala shook her head. He gestured to 2 of the people beside Asala, and his tone darkened. Take her to the holding cells and keep watch. We won't let her ruin our celebrations. Rattled, Asala couldn't formulate words, as she had no idea what celebrations the raiders had planned, or what they intended to do with her. The 4-person team flanked around her, creating a box. 1 in front, leading the way, one on either side and one behind. If she walked too slowly, she received a sharp and painful jab in the back. If she walked too fast, she got a jab from the front person's elbow. Already sore and scratched up from her trek through the jungle, her muscles ached and burned in the wake of adrenaline. Her hands itched to fight, to flee, but her common sense told her she wouldn't get far. Her captors wouldn't waste any time bringing her down, especially the woman leading them. Although shorter than Asala, the woman's sinewy body had tight muscles. They all wore short sleeves or sleeveless tops, and the front captor's upper body strength was on display beneath the layer of red dust.
No, Nana. I ate the strange fruit after I cooked it,
the female captor to her right said candidly, and giggled as if she were a young child. When she turned to face Asala, her eyes were glazed.
None of that sass, old lady. Yes, I loved the pie.
Asala looked around at the other captors and noticed that none of them responded. Perhaps the woman wore a small communications earpiece device, because none of the others gave any indication that they had heard her. Asala didn't see a microphone, but one could have been embedded where she couldn't see. But the hairs on her arms rose. She'd seen behavior like this before, with Oba and with Sim. As the five of them made their way along the camp's edge, she spied children and what appeared to be family groups speaking to each other. But the communication looked odd, disjointed. They didn't speak directly to each other. An older woman spoke enthusiastically with hands gesturing with emotion. She swept her hand to the empty spot beside her, a wide grin on her face. Seated adjacent to her, another woman about the same age cupped her hands and spoke as if to someone seated beside her. The two women were covered in the red dust that blanketed almost everything. Yet neither moved to wipe it off or dislodge the thick amounts in their hair along their skin and feet. It looked odd. It reminded Asala of Oba's strange behavior before his suicide, and it unsettled her. What is going on in this camp? Asala took in her surroundings, her misgivings growing. If she had an opportunity to escape, she needed to know where to go. But the strange way the camp's residents behaved made her uneasy. Asala's training kicked in, and she assessed her environment. Worn paths had been created through the camp. Tight and compact, the structures had been laid out on a logical plan, printed in a circle around the raised platform the leader Montgomery had been speaking from. Each home could see the platform from the front of the structure. Behind those, a large area had been cleared and sectioned off with laser beams. Just beyond the beams, a storage building had been erected. Asala spied her cruiser parked behind that electric blue stream. The same type of laser the military used to quarantine off dangerous sections or partition off classified places. How did they get that material? Then it hit her like a lightning bolt. Of course, they stole it. Asala would have face-palmed if her hands were free. Instead, she shook her head as the female lead captor slowed.
Here, she said over her shoulder. Put her in the first one.
Then the leader stepped aside, pivoting to allow Asala to keep going on her own. Stunned, Asala took in the building in front of her. Gray printed hard plastic with makeshift barred windows rose up in front of her. Inside, she spied a blanket on the floor and little else. In this heat, that little box would dehydrate her fast. She saw no cup or place for water. They should just kill me now, rather than drag it out.
Move!
The rear captor slammed his fist into her back, making Asala stumble forward. He was agitated. The rest of the team moved forward to the gray cells. With her back singing in misery, Asala found her footing and headed for the cell. It looked small, but as they got closer, she noticed they were tall, allowing her to stand inside. The problem was they weren't as wide, so she would not be able to stretch her legs out if she sat on the floor. They weren't designed for people. These were designed for animals, subjects, or alien items they found for scientific study. These brutal captors were scientists? It didn't make sense. So much of what she discovered didn't match any of her expectations or what limited information Sim had given them. A male captor came from around the back. He marched up to the first cell, opened it, and waved her in.
Come on, get in. We don't have all the time in the world. There's a celebration going on.
She didn't want another punch or hard jab from the two people flanking her, so she let out a slow breath as she walked up to the man. The two others remained close beside her, weapons at the ready. She held still as he freed her wrists. Without waiting for him to tell her, either with his words or his hands, Asala walked into the gray cell and spun around to face them.
You don't have to keep me here. You can let me go,
Asala said. She rubbed her wrists and noticed the dust coming off on her fingertips.
Yes, we do. You shot Javier,
the female lead said. She had come up to the cell and locked it with a fingerprint and what sounded like a 6-digit code.
While we remained in a period of meditation and communion, you brought violence into our camp. You deserve to be in a cage like so many base, animalistic human beings.
The woman's fervor and harshness took Asala by surprise. She frowned and approached the bars.
I wouldn't be here at all if your peaceful raiders hadn't stolen my cruiser. You can't release violence into the universe and not expect it to be revisited upon you.
Now it was the lead's turn to be shocked. She and Asala locked eyes, and for a brief moment, they understood each other. Or so Asala thought, hoped. Had she made a connection? One that might help her gain her freedom? She had to try. The lead captor blinked and had started to turn away when Asala stuck her hand through the bars. Wait! Wait! She turned to look at Asala.
What? Can you give me something to wipe all this dust off?
You want to wipe it off? The woman asked, her tone indicating the idea was absurd. In fact, the other 3 raiders burst out laughing. They shook their heads, as if what Asala asked was lunacy.
Yes, it's in everything, and it's dangerous,
Asala explained. She took in her captors now that she could see them all together, and noticed that they were covered in the red dust too, like the people she saw in the camp.
You don't wipe it off. You should.
No, the woman smirked. Kenya, give her your gathering cloth. Why mine? Kenya, who had been flanked on Asala's left side, stomped over to the cell, reached into her pants pocket, and pulled out a gray cloth. She shoved it through the bars to Asala. Because you haven't gathered today, so yours will have the least on it. Kenya returned to stand by the others without so much as a mumbled word of complaint. Her body language said it all. Arms crossed, scowling, and hunched against the sunlight, Kenya didn't like it one bit. For the briefest of moments, Asala was reminded of Nico. The emotion stabbed her like a sharp knife to the chest, and she gasped. Her hand flew to her heart, but it continued to beat in its usual rhythm. The woman said, "There. I'm leaving a guard here, so behave yourself. You've caused enough damage and drama for our camp." She turned away and walked over to the crew. The 4 of them competed in what appeared to be a hand game. From what Asala could make out, there were several draws before one of them lost.
"By the stars!"
roared the male who had made Asala sore as he threw his hands up in the air, apparently cursing the heavens for his defeat. He made an eerie remark.
"Pinch yourself."
The lead said, "It'll only be for a few hours, then we'll trade off." He didn't reply, but stormed up to the cell, glared at Asala, and stood just off to the right of the building, his arms crossed in a huff, his body rigid with rage. She slid down into a sitting position, more than aware of her injuries. She sat cross-legged and began to gently massage her calves. If only she had her pack and her rifle. The lead captor had taken those items with her, as she left with the others. Go ahead and leave. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The hot day slid into night, with the evening winds bringing a scented, cool breeze. Inside her cell, Asala woke up to the sound of shuffling footsteps and the rustle of clothing. The guard had changed. Outside, now Kenya stood on the other side of the bars with a cup and a frown. Here, something to drink, Kenya blurted out. Asala realized that Kenya had been trying to wake her. She uncrossed her legs, suppressing the urge to shout out as 1,000 pinpricks erupted across her calves and feet. Thankfully, the cell didn't require her to cross a great distance to get the cup. She took it and looked up at Kenya. What's in here? Water. Asala didn't move. Kenya rolled her eyes. If we wanted you dead, we would have shot you already. You aren't letting me go either, Asala replied, noting how parched her throat had become in the last few hours. She lifted the cup to her lips and sipped. It tasted like water. Outside the cell, Kenya shrugged. We aren't the violent ones. No? Then who stole my cruiser and almost killed me and several others by flipping over my jeep? Asala sipped a little more water. If they meant to poison her, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of gulping it all down at once. Kenya didn't respond. Asala clenched her teeth. She needed to befriend her captors, not anger them further. She inched closer to the bars. She hung the gray cloth outside the bars and dangled it. Do you want your... what did you call it? A collection cloth back? No, there's no point now, Kenya snapped. It's still good and intact. A quick washing will... Oh, shut up. You don't wash a gathering cloth. Kenya snatched the cloth and stuffed it into her pocket. After a few tense moments, Asala tried again. Look, I'm obviously not from this camp, so I don't know anything about you except what the raiders did. Why not tell me about the gathering cloth? You don't need to know about it, Kenya retorted. I would like to know about it. Why? Why not? Asala didn't want to explain that she wanted to understand how and why Oba had died. That's not an answer. Kenya rounded on the cell. Now, only the thick plastic bars stood between Asala and her guard. We have nothing but time. Let's pass it by you telling me about the gathering cloth. There's no harm in it, right? It isn't sacred. In the end, what we have left is often just our stories. As we age, we lose our beauty, our strength, and sometimes our health. All that remains are stories. So tell me the story of the gathering cloth. Kenya sighed. I hadn't the chance to use mine. Asala waited for Kenya to continue. Just when she thought the younger guard wouldn't be inclined to share any more, a soft voice broke through the tense quiet. When we first set up camp, many of the plants we brought out of orbit with us didn't do so well. They either died or produced little output. We were starving. Asala had heard the same observations from other camps on the ground. We started stealing from other camps because, well, we didn't have a choice. Then, Montgomery discovered something amazing. Kenya's voice lit up, and it drew Asala closer to the bars. The guard had pivoted away, placing her back against the cell to the left. Asala could make out her profile if she stood all the way to the right. The red dust is a fungus, and it's a major part of the planet's ecosystem. A system we messed up by coming here. Asala drew a breath. This fungus is dangerous. It isn't. And it is so much more. It conjures visions so vivid, so alive, that you wouldn't even know until someone pinched you or you tripped or something. Look what it did to Oba. She didn't want to halt Kenya's story, so she kept her questions to herself. The gathering cloth allows us to collect the dust, and we use it as needed. Kenya went on to explain. It has become a bit of a contest to some, but during the celebration, it is encouraged to gather as much as possible. Why? Because we're using it a lot during celebration. That's why Chikoa made me give you mine. It hadn't been gathering as much as the others. Well, or at all, really. I watched it wreak havoc on others, Asala said. The dust brings positive encounters to many a camp, but Kenya's voice wobbled. Asala didn't need her to spell it out. The visions Kenya saw weren't pleasant, and that made her reluctant to gather and celebrate. Asala slumped against the wall as she thought back to the dazed and strange expressions and actions she'd observed. She had an inkling that more rested beneath the surface. She thought back to her interaction in the jungle with Dio. The fungus's power to convey strong emotions and vivid, touchable hallucinations. It wasn't real. The raiders must have thought she was hysterical for demanding they produce Dio when no one was there. She rubbed her face. The dust covered everything, but now inside the cell, there wasn't quite the volume as outside. If what Kenya said was true, and Asala had no reason to doubt it, then she'd been victimized by the fungus. She shook her head. How and why would it attack them? Moreover, why were people embracing such a force? She rolled over on the wall to face Kenya's direction. Why do people embrace it, consume it? It's reckless to just start using a foreign substance when we don't know how it affects the human body, or births, or the elderly, Asala said. How does it interact with other diseases? There's so much we don't know about this dust. Kenya shrugged again. I don't know. It's like a fever. I guess we're the test subjects. All of us are. Every camp, every person that came over during the evac and scrambled down here to start a new life are the first round of test subjects. If you're looking to observe and conduct an experiment, well, we're the human trials, aren't we? Asala gasped and clutched her chest. Kenya was right. She pushed her hair back and drank a long draught of water. When done, she cleared her throat and shifted gears. What is this celebration tonight? Kenya didn't answer. Asala had tried to make it less obvious that she was pumping her for information. The cells remained on the outskirts of the camp, at the edge of the forest. But even from this distance, the celebration's din reached them. The guard remained silent, perhaps plunged into her own internal musings and reflection. Or maybe she'd been entrapped in one of those waking visions the fungus induced. In the growing silence, Asala pushed off the wall and returned to the rear of the cell, where the woven blanket pooled at her feet. The information unspooled in her head, shifting and swirling what previous knowledge she had about the planet with what Kenya provided. The implication that people were actively ingesting an alien fungus. She had to let Dio and her team know as soon as possible. They had to prepare for possible illness or impact. She wiped her face with the blanket, careful to remove the fine layer of dust. It drifted in through the rectangular window, right past the bars. Asala also pondered what impact the fungus had on the skin and pores. She had to get out of there. Outside the cell, Kenya motioned to the shadows. Asala clambered to her feet and hurried back to the barred window. Ahead, 3 individuals made their way across the yard. One of the people in the middle swiveled and tried to run, but was swiftly subdued. Kenya scrambled to assist them. When she intercepted the trio, the chaos escalated. Shouts and shuffling feet broke through the quiet. As they drew closer, Asala could see the person the guards had clasped in restraints. She gasped. "It can't be." She fell back a step, her heart hammering in her chest. The male guard's words came roaring back to her mind. "Pinch yourself." She did, and it hurt. Ow! It can't be. There's no plausible way they can be here. Asala's rational mind rejected what she saw, and she gripped the bars until her knuckles turned white and ached. She opened her mouth to shout to them. Nothing came out but a frustrated growl. She shook her head and fell back uneasy. The person wrestled against the guards, trying with all their strength to free themselves, bucking and thrashing. Asala couldn't believe it. She'd pinched herself sore, thus confirming she wasn't under the fungus's influence. No, what she witnessed, she took in with eyes wide and awake. At first sickened, she didn't notice the tears until she tasted them. Bitter and salty, they forced her to confront the surprising reality. Someone she recognized. Relief mixed with a touch of hesitation brought more tears. Nico was on salvation.
You're listening to The Vela Salvation by Nicole Givens-Kurtz, starring Robin Miles. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. The Vela Salvation is written by Ashley Poston, Maura Milan, Nicole Givens-Kurtz, and Sangu Mendana. It is produced by Rhoda Bilyeza and executive produced by Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.